Hello, and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I am Jeff Strane with SHI International, and we are partnering with CDO Magazine, MIT CDO IQ, and the International Society of Chief Data Officers in a series of interviews. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dessa Gypalo, Chief Data Officer at the Illinois Department of Innovation and Technology. Good morning, and tell us about yourself.
Good morning, Jeff. Thank you for having me, and thank you, CDO Magazine, for having me. Well, sometimes it feels like I've lived 1,000 lives in my career, all chasing this understanding of how things work and how things come together. I'm a true data nerd. I worked in the civic arena for the entirety of my career at different points of it, and got into data after a brief stint in communications and consulting work. It was very clear from that initial communications work that while I was a very good communicator, that wasn't my passion. I was really interested in the data side of things. So my career path was a little bit nonlinear, and I kind of started at the end of where most people do. I started a consulting firm, was there for a few years, and then I moved into organizing spaces, so more political campaigns, nonprofit world, really trying to get that lever of data, right? How do we get people to take action in the civic arena? And then I moved to a software company where I really honed more of the technical skills and the technical service-based leadership before coming into government in 2018. I was the first ever CDO for Cook County, Illinois, the second largest county in the country, before coming over to the state in 2021. Most of my career has been really just chasing my own curiosity of, again, how do things work? I'm a lifelong learner. I love taking on a big challenge. And then in my spare time, I like to hang out with my rescue dog, Tonks. I play guitar. I'm a big crafter, paper crafts, embroidery, sewing, anything I can do tangibly with my hands, because most of my day is spent very much in my head working on these data challenges.
Very interesting and very diverse. Was there someone who encouraged or inspired you into this leadership role?
So I've been lucky. I've had quite a few mentors and sponsors throughout my career, and a majority of them have been outside of the data analytics space, starting in communications, right? I had mentors and sponsors who were going, maybe this isn't the best career path for you, but let's figure out what is the thing that's going to speak to your passion. But coming up in the organizing space, there were not a lot of a lot of women in data analytics or tech. I was lucky enough to find a great group of women mid-career, and I was really inspired by them and the community that we were working within to take that next step up into leadership. And throughout that community and that group of women, we've been kind of our own mentors and sponsors throughout the years, cheering each other on, helping with, resume review, being the person in the corner saying, yes, you should go apply for this. And then when things were getting, scary, having that community to always fall back on and talk things through and work through some of those leadership challenges of how do you get from here to really learn and grow. I've always been this service-oriented person. Both my parents were public school teachers, and this has been ingrained in me of wanting to leave things better than I found them, with a focus on investing in people. And that was what I found in this organizing community with this group of women. And so we wanted to build something that we could pass it forward. And so we started an organization called Crack the Code that was specifically based on that mentorship and sponsorship for the next generation of data leaders, specifically women and non-binary folks who didn't necessarily have a home in those spaces. So long way of saying, there's a group of women who have inspired me, who I've been inspired by and inspired, I guess we could say, and really relying on that to kind of look at that space and go, we don't want anybody else to go through the same thing that we did. So let's band together, create this community so we can lift up that next generation.
Very interesting. Now, is the group you mentioned, is that in Illinois, or is it a national group of ladies?
Yeah, so it's a national group, and we met all in DC. So I lived in Chicago for a few years, moved to DC for 6 years, and have been back in Chicago since 2018. And because of that, it's a really national scope. One of the sad thing is that since most of us have left DC, the organization hasn't done as much recently, but we've kept it alive in different ways. But at the time, we were doing conferences, or unconferences as we called them. We were doing resume review. We were doing lightning talks to give women the experience of talking about something they care about in 5-minute stints. Doing things
Right.
like that to really push it forward and prepare women to step up into those leadership roles and have those leadership skills.
That's great. A career in this field clearly offers so much, an opportunity to innovate, advance, lead, and make an impact. What can we do to encourage people to pursue these kinds of leadership positions in this field?
So, in my view, leadership is not just a title, right? It's more than just where you sit in the hierarchy. And it's a series of actions and behaviors that will get you there. And when I think about leadership, in data analytics spaces, I break it into two areas, strategic and technical. They're not mutually exclusive.
Mhm.
But when I think about that path and how do you get to those hierarchies, the top of those hierarchies, there's different approaches that people can take. And my advice and encouragement is really find what you care about. If you really love coding and you are an amazing Python coder, or maybe you're a data scientist and you just want to spend all day in R, go for it. That doesn't disqualify you from being a leader and getting into a leadership role. And the same for, in my career path, I'm more of a generalist, a data generalist.
Mhm.
My skill set is much more on the strategy side. And getting people to come together, having conversations, being that translator role. But 10 years ago, that would have precluded me from being in leadership because I didn't necessarily have the hard skills. But through, again, this network and mentorship and sponsorship, I've been able to build that up into being the CDO of Cook County and now the state of Illinois, leveraging that strategic mindset. So when I think about somebody who is mid-career and wants to
Mhm.
make that step, what I would say is really look at where data sits in your organization or in the world that you're trying to get into, and build up your hard skills, but also understanding that it's focused on communication, translation, teamwork, collaboration,
Mhm.
and leverage those skills, and also find your people, right? At the end of the day, it's finding the people who are going to encourage you, are going to work with you, who are going to be excited for you, and that will help you take that next step.
And talk for a minute about specific advice you would have for women related to skills or qualities that you would think would be valuable entering this field.
Yeah, so data analytics is such a broad space. It's hard now to say, if you have this skill, you're going to be fine because it's so broad and there's so many different avenues and so many different ways that people can break in and really, really blossom with the work that they're doing. But the main skills that I think about, beyond your technical ability, everybody should have some level in this data analytics space of understanding data structures, and understanding how to move data. Whatever hard skill that is, whatever programming language that is, that's a key component. But beyond that, communication skills, the ability to write and communicate in conversation, and break things down from a very technical level to a non-technical level. Most of the
Mhm.
people that I work with are not very technical, and that's fine. My job is not to necessarily train them on how to be technical, but to work with them to solve problems. And that goes into being collaborative, understanding that data is not done in a vacuum. There's very rarely the time where the person who is creating the data is also the data owner and the business owner and the only consumer of that data. It's
Mhm.
a lot more cross collaborative. So being able to understand, and work with people that come from different backgrounds, have different mindsets, have different job roles to collaborate to make something. Adaptability and flexibility is another big one. It is so rare that the first time we set out to do something in data analytics, it works perfectly.
Mhm.
And for those listening, if you have a project that has never had a bug, I salute you. I have never had that in my career.
That's good.
So being able to be flexible and adapt to the current circumstances and not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, but not lose sight of what you're ending up toward. And then the last piece of advice, and one of the qualities that I think is so important in this space, is the understanding that you will not often be the smartest person in the room. And that's totally fine. That's not your job. Your job is not always to be the smartest person in the room. Your job is to learn and grow from others and take that knowledge and wisdom that others are sharing and apply that to your work, apply that to your projects, and apply that to kind of your lifestyle and career in data analytics.
Really good. Good. A critical part, clearly, of a successful data strategy is creating that culture. How do you enable data literacy?
Ooh, this is such a
That's a big one.
big one. And it's one that is so top of mind for me. When I think about my strategic plan for the state, it's one of the core pillars.
Mhm.
And for me, the first step is really defining what it means for your organization. And I can't speak for other organizations. I'm looking at government, specifically state government. And so our big challenge is taking this very esoteric concept and making it tangible to people who may not want to be engaged with data, may not think that they're a data person or think that they're data minded. There's still a lot of fear and anxiety around data and how it's used and what it can be used for. And so we need to break down some of those barriers. One of the definitions that I really like when it comes to data literacy is it's the ability to read and write and create and communicate data in context. And while you're doing that, understanding how humans impact and are impacted by data. So again, very broad, esoteric concept, breaking that down. So the next step, once you define your what you're solving for, essentially, what your definition is, you need to look at the different levels of your organization. So example, what does leadership need to know to be a critical consumer of data? If they're presented with charts, graphs, information, what questions would you expect your leadership to ask of the data owners, of the business owners, to get to those critical questions? From a practitioner level, what does a practitioner need to know in order to maintain high data quality and also minimize the biases that we know creep into data, depending on how it's created, handled, used, all of that. And then from the consumer end, and a consumer can be, for us, a member of the public. It could be a peer of mine who's consuming something that I created. What do they need to know to effectively leverage that good data and that information that is being presented to them? So once you have that done, it's really thinking about that intention and iteration for you've set your layer, you're building your foundation.
Really
Now
like
what? So what? And so you build out your program. Sometimes it's training based, but when it comes to training, the secret sauce is really making sure that there's a throughput to the person's day to day. Sometimes it's creating what I call a data splainer. That is bite-sized concepts
that.
tailored to a specific audience. So an example of both of these, a training, hard skills, let's use Excel. Making sure that the sample data that you're using is relevant to the audience that you're training. In government, we don't deal with sales or revenue or profit in the same way that the private sector does. So using a sales data example isn't going to resonate the same way as using a service example of here's a process and we're trying to understand what the big points are of the process and if we know we're on the right track or wrong track. Same way with the splainers. This is something that I love creating. It gets my creative juices flying here. But thinking about different types of data visualization. What's a bite-sized piece that I can present to somebody that's going to take them maybe a minute to consume, but comes with a visual, some pros, and then best practices in one page. And that way it gives that teaser, it gives that information, but it's not overwhelming somebody with a bunch of really heavy, hard data concepts and making it more relevant to their day-to-day.
Incredibly thoughtful answer. That's really exciting. I want to thank you. This has been an incredibly interesting interview, and thank you for joining me today. Please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews. Thanks again, Dessa.
Thank you.